Linden Forbes Samson Bonham, well known as voter, master politician, and was an outstanding statesman. He was a great leader, another hero you understand. That's why we remember Edmund Bonham.
Yes, morning to you once again, Guyana, and I'm with you again. I want to first of all apologize for not being with you last Sunday. Our program was scheduled for last Sunday, the fourth Sunday of the month of August, but unfortunately that had to be rescheduled, say, to this week for other programs and activities that we had to be engaged in. However, we're here today, and today we'll be discussing a very current topic in all the communities in Guyana: local government. Local government is in the air. I understand it is scheduled to be held on the 12th of November 2018. And with me in the studio today is the chairman of the Forbes Bonham Foundation, Mr. Vincent Alexander, who is also an individual who is considered an authority on local government and local government issues. He's also a commissioner on the Guyana Elections Commission. So we will be talking about local government today, and I want to start off by saying that the APNU AFC, in their campaign for elections in 2015, they promised the Guyanese people that, having not had local government elections for a number of years, they will be conducting regular local government elections. And so far they have kept that promise, and the second election is scheduled for the 12th of November. They have been able to do that, but there are issues. And that's the reason why I invited Mr. Alexander today, for us to look at local government in its wider sense, and what is it that we have been able to garner, that means all of Guyana, from this new experience. Because for a number of people it was a new thing, they never really knew about it because it wasn't held for so long. And at this stage I want to invite Mr. Alexander to just give me some remarks in relation to the local government election that were held first, and how do you think the country has fared in relation to those elections, having held them in 2016 and now slated again for 2018, the month of November?
The local government elections 2016 were landmark elections. Landmark elections for a number of reasons. On one hand, they were landmark elections because they were coming after a hiatus between 1994 and 2016, so some 21 years plus hiatus. But also they introduced new elements in the system of local government. Historically, we used to have constituencies as a basis for local government elections prior to 1969, 1970. But in the period 1970 up to 1994, we followed the PR system.
That's the proportional representation
system. And so in 2016, we returned to what is referred to as a mixed system, where we have both the PR and the constituencies at work. So that in any local government area where elections are held, you have the voters electing half of the number of councillors through a PR system, proportional representation, where the entire community is taken as the voting catchment, and the contestants are awarded seats based on the percentage of the votes that they got from that entire catchment. But at the same time, these local areas are divided into constituencies, that represent a number of seats equivalent to the number of seats contested for under the PR system. So, for example, if you take the city of Georgetown, they have 30 councillors. That's 30 seats. 15 of those seats are contested under the PR arrangement, and 15 of those seats are contested under the constituency arrangement, which means that Georgetown is divided into 15 constituencies. The principle involved here is that each local authority area would have half of its seats contested for under the PR system and half of its seats contested for under the constituency system, so that there is a need in each local area to establish constituencies equivalent to half of the number of seats. So that was something new. That also introduced a new element into the elections, and that was that from 1970 to 1994, only parties and or groups, community groups, could participate in the elections, since it was a list system. But with the introduction of constituencies, it provided for individuals in that aspect of the elections, the constituency aspect, to participate. So the individual unaffiliated to a party could participate, as well as parties can put up a candidate or a group could put up a candidate. So it's something new. All of this, in some regards, is responsive to the constitutional reform process, where the Constitution spelled out the need for a local government system that provides for greater accountability. And one would argue that where you have a councillor who is identified with a constituency, then there is the provision for the constituency to be able unequivocally to relate to someone whom they would have elected. When you have a list system, you can have all sorts of geographical distortions of representation. For example, up to 1994, when one looked at the lists, one could see sometimes that most of the councillors came from one part of the town, and another part was virtually unrepresented. But with this uniform system of constituencies, it ensures that every part of the local area has a representative, and so the electors, the voters, have someone who they could relate to, specifically as someone who they elected to represent the interests in the council. And so that's the other new element that the system has brought.
I want to perhaps hear your views on another aspect. I really like the explanation and the information that you're provided in relation to this new system. But for the past 2 years, people have been unaccustomed to local authority operatives in the specific areas, because everything used to happen from central, where if there's any activity to be done, it had to go through kind of central. The subject ministries particularly used to address those matters, and persons within the local areas became disillusioned. And I think this disillusionment has also caused people to become disinterested. And now that they are going back to this new system, where persons from the particular constituency area, the areas or local authority areas, will now have the responsibility to really address local government issues in the area of representation. I know that some people over the past 2 years didn't even understand the system, but their names have gone up through groups, through party, and in some cases some individuals who had a better understanding of how the system worked were able to make an impact in the kind of constituency. I would like to really have you give a kind of evaluation of this past 2 years and the performance of persons who were actually put up by, in some cases, party and groups in relation to the impact they have made in relation to the local government.
Well, first of all, when one considers that elections were last held in 1994, and that prior to 1994, they were held in 1970, we really have not embraced a culture of local elections for the last, how many years? 1970, some 40-something years. 40-something years, we have not really embraced a culture of local elections. And so people are not, have not been engaged in local elections, have not been engaged in electing councillors. And so it's something alien and almost strange to some people, this thing called local government and local elections. So irrespective of which system was introduced in '94 and further developed in 2016, people simply weren't quite acquainted. And the fact that having had elections in '94, those elections were not held again in 2016, continued, perpetuated this alienation, this distancing of people from the culture of local government elections, and local government governance. So that's the first point I want to make. Almost all of Guyana, in some regards, has found itself on a learning curve in relation to local government. And I can tell you, for example, in 1994, after those elections, I visited some parts of the country, and within months, councillors had ceased to work, had resigned. They seem to have expectations that they're not in keeping with what local government is all about.
That's another area.
Also that some of them came onto the councils through their parties and so, and in very short order, they're no longer there to serve the people, because in some regards they probably felt it was a process for self-service rather than a process for serving the people. Now, in 2016, we have elections again, but we have this new element of constituencies. I'm not sure that we've had the kind of preparation required to make people and councillors fully prepared and ready for what they took on in 2016. Many people came. In the first instance, though there was provision for individuals to contest, because of the country's tradition, history, and the way in which the politics of the country has been for decades, we found that there was domination of parties in even the constituencies. And so one couldn't be sure that the voters were looking at the candidates and the candidates' track record, because one would expect someone who is contesting the constituency to, in the first instance, be living in that area, not merely registered, but living in the area. One would expect that person to be someone who has been involved with the people at the community level through the community organizations, whether it's a club or a community group or whatever it might be. And that would be the basis for putting oneself forward. But in the instance where you have party reps and so on, that didn't factor that much. People probably still voted along party lines, and so you didn't necessarily have the most active, the most popular, the most conscious community person being able to emerge as the councillor for the area. And in some instances, the people, though they are registered and rightfully voted in the area, were not necessarily still residing even in the area for which they were elected to be councillors. So that there seem to be some flaws in the politic of the elections at the local level. And even where people were elected and lived in the area, again, because of their own, of being sponsored, in a sense, because of their non-activism prior to, they simply didn't know, they weren't committed to what is expected of a constituency councillor, because a constituency councillor is expected to be acquainted with the local area, acquainted geographically, to know the local area. A constituency council is expected to be acquainted with the people locally. A constituency council is expected to be acquainted with the local organizations. Because if one even goes back to the Constitution, one would see in the Constitution it spells out unequivocally that local government should be recognizing and working with the organizations of the working people. And so they should really be working with the organizations in the local area, be those organizations, churches, be they community groups, be they youth groups, be they sporting groups. Because that provision for them to work with those groups is built on the provision of Article 13 of the Constitution, which also says that you must have a mechanism for people's involvement and inclusion in things of governance. And so that culture was not necessarily present. The idea of the culture may not have been informing the decisions taken as people sought to identify councillors. And so people became councillors, but really were not committed to a culture.
I want to come in at this point and perhaps I should tell viewers that I will be opening the lines in another few minutes for you to make your contribution to this discourse that we'll be having this morning on local government. You made a point that the country, the geography of Guyana posed some problems early on in terms of effectively administering and also implementing and conducting local government elections. With this new approach that was introduced and the two-tier system, the proportional representation and first past the post, and the geography of the country as it is right now, it was very difficult for central government to deal with many issues in the regions. Our country divided into 10 regions. And now that they have addressed this issue, taking into account all those flaws that we have experienced between 2016 and now, how do you think having local government elections and having that period which we can describe as a gestation period between 2016 and now, how do you think the people in the community will kind of respond towards candidates who might be coming up now to put themselves up for elections so that they can hold them accountable for programs that need to be administered in the local kind of community with a view to ensuring that the community get the kind of attention that is part of government's policy, but the central government has been able to work on those programs and activities because of its distance. What do you think?
First of all, let me say that local government is all about decentralization. Local government comes with a recognition that central government cannot efficiently or effectively deliver services to communities, and that there's need for some agency, some body closer to the people who can organize and efficiently and effectively deliver those services. There are two aspects to this decentralization. There is the administrative aspect, meaning the aspect of service delivery. How do you administer the delivery of goods and services to people? But there's also the political aspect, because you can have the local government that is not electoral, it's appointed, because you're driving to get efficient delivery of goods and services. But when you have local government which involves elections and local authorities which are elected, you're going beyond the mere administrative delivery of goods and services. You're trying to involve the people themselves in that process of the delivery of goods and services. And what you're doing is trying to work on strengthening the democratic system and the system of governance through the process of inclusion. So we need to see local government from that perspective, of a system that's intended to decentralize, and to decentralize not only administrative power, but to decentralize political power, because people are then elected, and they're elected to be representatives
Of the constituency.
of the local people in the local authority area, and more specifically elected to be representatives of the various constituencies.
I like the point, that point, because there are people, because of the way our country is geographically positioned and how the difficulty in getting to these regions and dealing with various developmental issues, we find that there are people in some constituencies who are in support of one party as against the other, but you might find a candidate who perhaps because of his or her ability work in the community in relation to addressing issues to advance the welfare of the people in the community, you will find people from other parties voting for that particular person because of them recognizing that such a person can really move the community or the local authority area forward. So I find the concept of proportional representation as well as the first past the post system to really bring to reality this local democracy of which you speak.
Well, yes, because you see the disadvantage of proportional representation, particularly where it is implemented through a list system of parties and so, is that those people are not necessarily identified with particular geographic areas, and because they are taken from a list, a party list, they tend to look in two directions. They look in the direction of the party that put them there, because they're not there based on their own strength necessarily, they're there based on the party's strength. So they look to the party all the time. And in looking to the party, they do not necessarily look as much as they need to the people themselves and the needs of the people. So that system of PR has its difficulties, and it's for that reason that one would want to look for a system of constituencies. But the political landscape of Guyana presents problems with constituencies, because the way in which we have enclaves, ethnic enclaves and so, you can have all sorts of difficulties arising from a system of constituencies, because one has to draw up constituencies. And in drawing up constituencies, one has to find some kind of criteria. You just don't want to draw a constituency, you have to find the criteria. And very often the criteria would be a minimum population size. That would be one of the criteria to decide what's a constituency.
I want to...
A minimum population size. But when you go for minimum population size, you may well find that because of the nature of our political landscape and our demography, that one set of people are absorbed as a minority into a constituency and really don't have much of a chance or a say in terms of who will emerge and what will eventually happen in their constituency. So we do have a conundrum in terms of how do we determine our constituencies in local areas where you have the overall area may be multi-ethnic, but you have ethnic conclaves in the local area, so that one has to look beyond mere numbers. One also has to take into consideration the geography, because some communities are natural communities by virtue of the geography of the community. And then one has to look at interests. What are the various interest groups that are in the community? And I always like to give the example of industry plaisance. If you look at industry plaisance and you look to the southern side of industry plaisance, you will see that in the main along the southern side, particularly in Plaisance and the industry itself, that basically those are working class people. But if you go across the road to Corrida Park, you will see that in Corrida Park you have the high income people. Now, these are different community of interests. And so it would be, you would be creating false communities if you were to draw constituencies that included Corrida Park on the northern side and Plaisance or Sparendam or Butterwalkton on the southern side. Not the same community of interest. So what people would want would differ. And so sometimes when you have that situation, it poses a problem in terms of how do you get constituencies where the numbers are kind of equal. You know, community of interest can cause you to have constituencies where one has a large number and one has a lesser number, but they all have the same right as a community to some involvement and engagement. So where there are constituencies, there is always this problem of how do you arrive at the contours, the boundaries, and how do you try to get constituencies of equal weighting. And political parties always weigh in on this matter because they may find that because of a community of interest, that what may for them be 2 seats turns out to be one constituency and 1 seat, and what number of votes would normally be equivalent to 2 seats, and you go somewhere else and you find that a small number of people, because of community of interest, represent 1 seat, where in other circumstances they may be part
of
a larger body of people. So there are issues that one would have to address, and these issues are not easily addressed simply because to have the political players address these issues creates a problem, because they come to it from the perspective of garnering of votes. They don't come to it from the perspective of
service.
taking these factors, community of interest and geography and population into consideration. They're looking to see how best this thing could serve their purpose in terms of the acquisition of votes.
I like the point you made there, because quite recently, and this is one I would like you to address, an accusation has been leveled against the Minister of Communities and the government per se, and Guyana Elections Commission. The question of gerrymandering local government areas. And they're saying that the Ministry of Communities and GCOM have been engaged in this act.
Well, first of all, the law is unequivocal. I think there's a law which everybody voted for, both at the level of the constitutional reform process and subsequent laws, the Local Democratic Organs Act and its amendments, that the minister is the one who is empowered to establish local authority areas. So that establishment of these areas is a function of the minister. Indeed, the Local Democratic Organs Act, notwithstanding the empowerment of the minister, does specify a number of things the minister should take into consideration. The Act specifies population, interests, infrastructure, economic viability. So the number of factors, and the law says, look, minister, when you're drawing up these areas, take this into consideration. But at the end of the day, the minister has to exercise his judgment using those factors to determine what would be a local authority area. Now, once the minister has made such a determination,
well, he will garner that information from the local people.
well, from the local people, from lands and surveys, from the statistical bureau, and
yeah, I just wanted
various sources. But once he has done that, he then has to determine what's the number of seats. How many seats you should have in a local area, how many councillors. Now, if you look at the history of this, one could see again distortions. If I'm not mistaken, New Amsterdam, one of our major towns, has 12 councillors. You can go to another place, probably Rose Hall or so, 18 councillors. So how does one justify this disparity in the size of councils? So the important aspect here, I think, which the minister is faced with, is looking historically at this apparent disproportionality in terms of from a local authority to local authority, the amount of councillors, to try to correct that. And I think that what has happened in this instance is the ministers attempted to increase the number of councillors in some places and probably to decrease them in other places to bring this parity to
Some balance.
the local system, the national system of determining how many seats or how many councils the council has. Now, once the minister does that, then GCOM is faced with the next issue, because it is GCOM that has to go internally. The minister having pronounced that this council will have 20 seats, he does not himself get involved in crafting the constituencies. The law says if there are 20 seats, then you have to have 10 constituencies. It then behoves GCOM to go in and to establish those constituencies. And GCOM is the one that will now have to take into consideration those complex factors that I referred to earlier.
Having said that, this allegation of gerrymandering that was made.
I tried to make the point earlier on without reference to gerrymandering, that where there's political interest,
It's political interest. Okay, I just
where
wanted to.
there's political interest, these factors of community of interest and population size and geographic size and so this may be used, may not necessarily reflect political interest.
Okay.
And so you're not going to ever get constituencies all with the same number of voters. And so you are going to have a system where people are going to say that this constituency is skewed, that one is skewed, this one is not skewed, that the configuration is intended to skew. That is almost inevitable. And for that reason alone, I think that one has to try to keep the political parties out of the process of determining the boundary of constituencies. And in some regards, the local people are reflective of the political parties. One has to get some kind of technical and objective involvement in that process, particularly in the country of Guyana, which is not homogeneous. That is, it's you know, so that there is and will be that dilemma to be confronted. And I rather suspect that out of that dilemma, you will always have political parties contending that they have been shortchanged. It's a historical problem in Guyana. Prior to proportional representation in 1964 for the first time, you were a country that worked with constituencies. And what was found out was that the allocation of seats was disproportionate to the aggregate number of votes a party would have gotten. You have constituencies of different numbers, and people vote there, and the seats are given out based on constituencies. But when you add up all of the votes, and you look at the number of seats available, you found that, and let me give you a historical fact. And the PVP, for example, historically, prior to 1964, would win somewhere in the vicinity of 40-something% of the votes, but would always take home 60% of the seats. That was the historical problem that we were faced with that led to the campaign for proportional representation. And there are all sorts of people who come to conclusions about the British involvement and the American involvement in PR to change the government. But the question is, have they addressed whether the system was in fact fair in terms of representation of people in the parliament,
Mhm.
given the way in which the constituencies were drawn up, and given the result the constituencies threw up. So, this argument about the Americans and so, well, they may have been involved, and now, then, always, who knows?
Because maybe they themselves may have seen that the system is not fair.
Well, I don't know, but the fact that I'm making is, objectively speaking, with or without your involvement, one has to question whether the system was in fact a fair system. And we saw those people who were the beneficiaries of what existed protesting against proportional representation, but not necessarily doing so at a subsequent time. So, for me, really ideally one should have a system that is, in some regards, now our national system, where on one hand you have constituencies and seek to have people relating to an elected official. On the other hand, you have a number of top-up seats that will ensure this proportionality. So we do have proportionality in our national elections, but what has happened in our national elections, we have not committed ourselves to developing proper constituencies. We, in a very hurried manner, for 2001, accepted the regions would be multi-member constituencies. So, for example, something plenty Guyanese don't know, that when you go to vote in Region 4, you're voting for 7 parliamentarians for Region 4. When you go to vote in Region 6, you're voting for 4 parliamentarians in Region 6. And it's distributed at 25 seats in all that are elected that way across the country. When you go to vote in the Rupununi, you're voting for 1 parliamentarian.
In a big region like that.
Yeah. But at the end of the day, the top-up seats allow us to balance the results to a proportional result. But we have not allowed ourselves to create constituencies, smaller constituencies, that will allow people to know that they're relating to a constituency parliamentarian. So that
Average area.
in some regards we have made a farce of the pop system of constituencies for the national elections. But the point I wanted to make here in this instance is that there is a system of a hybrid system that allows for top-up seats to address the question of disproportionality. And so if you do that, you don't have the same problem with the so-called gerrymandering, because the result becomes a fair and equitable result, and so there's nothing to quarrel about. So we may have to, in fact, in my view, take a second look at the decisions we've made about local government in terms of how we've constituted the mixed system, and to see if we can get closer to something that's at the national level in terms of being able to come back to proportional representation in terms of the results, even if only in relation to the parties, because the problem we have now is individuals can contest, and so they wouldn't be a part of the top-up arrangement. It is only the parties, but it's the parties who quarrel. So probably we can have the top-up arrangement in relation to the parties, not excluding individuals from being able to contest at the constituency level.
All right, I think that was very detailed, and I want to. Our lines are now open, but this is very interesting discussion today. But I don't want to have this discussion without the participation of the public, because local government election is in the air for the 12th of November, and I want to take this opportunity to encourage everyone in Guyana to go out there and vote. You need to get yourselves together, go out there and vote for a representative in your area. I myself, I'll be contesting, I should tell you that, I'll be contesting in my constituency, which is constituency 5 in Georgetown. I want to just alert a few of my comrades down there, Mr. Ellis, Miss Anthony, Miss Edwards, Miss Hamilton, and Miss Christian. Those are persons on the ground there who have suggested and supporting me for constituency 5. So I have not yet been able to go to other areas. I think the Prime Minister is living in my constituency. I have other persons from North and Liliendal, because my constituency is really Patterson, Liliendal, and Sophia proper, from the seawall to the blocker. So I myself will be contesting. I don't know, will you be in your area?
No, certainly not. Certainly not. I'm not contesting. And you were fortunate that you have been able to use this forum to reach out to your constituency. That is not half of the work. The work is on the ground.
On the ground, that's right.
The Borland Foundation itself is not a party to elections, and do not, as a body, throw its weight behind any one person. We encourage the people to understand the need for local government, and for them to look at the issues and look at the performance of people in the communities as they make a determination as to who should be the councillor. So, Mr. Hines, I wish you the best. I wish you the best based on what you've been doing in your community and when people see you down there.
I see some calls are coming in. Morning, you're here.
Good morning, Mr. David Hans,
Morning, sir.
host, and your erstwhile guest, Mr. Vincent Alexander.
Yes.
Bonjour, monsieur, gentlemen.
Good morning, bonjour.
Allow me this brief opportunity to inject cautious optimism in the requirements and expectations for local government and state government in this country. We are an evolving democracy, very small in terms of numbers and geographic expanse, demographics, and the like. And secondly, we are limited in population. The total population of this country now numbers about 250,000, whereas 10, 20 years ago, it was just in the vicinity of 250 to 300,000. Therefore, all that we need to know and learn about border democracy has to be taught. And I think the Bible says, for the lack of knowledge, our people will be destroyed. And the extent of any optimism insofar as participation and wise voting is to be achieved in this country, I think the voter education program has to gain rapid and greater effect to try to expedite the local government system with rapidity. I think that is the recipe for disaster. It has to be cautiously developed over 30 to 40 years of our existence, or even more. Because, for instance, the people of the United States has been doing the federal system and state government for over 240 years of their independence. The British administered the world in colonialism for over 2 centuries or more. And only a few states very recently became independent in the 1960s, perhaps, and a little beyond. And the things that people are sorting out in those very elevated and accomplished democracies are still issues that we have not even learned yet. So I wish to say that those of us who speak into the audience and the public through direct contact and the like, that we have to speak to the people with the requirement of delivering knowledge. Our
Yes.
opinions may be useful to the extent of what we consider the actuality of what's going on to be. But sometimes we have to put those in the back burner and advance the cause, which is cause now that you're discussing, is pertinent to local government being efficient and effective in this nation. And I know that many of us here who are speaking to that issue and trying to develop the prospects of it will not be here to eat the fruits of enslavement. Then democracy, to that extent of central government and local government in Guyana, is fully accomplished, we will be gone, and we'll be hoping that the generation or generations after us will do as they're required to do. So I bless the effort that you're putting forward. And the next program, if you're addressing this issue at all, is to speak to the people more directly about learning and developing that voter information, education, methodology, to the extent that our nation shall be learned and do wise things. God bless you both.
All right, Arnold, I do like your contribution, and I recognize that you too recognize that the process, what we're doing, is just part of what is required. And this whole exercise is to make sure that our people, I regard the first period that we have had over the past 2 years plus as a learning period, because it was absent for some time. And the process, like you rightly said, it need to be kind of continuous, where we inform our people in the various communities. Education becomes very important, and it is the view that over time persons will be able to get to understand what role they would have to play in terms of ensuring their participation and support for local democracy in their area. I don't know if you wanted to.
No, I think the call is correct. There's need for education on this matter. And I think it's essentially because of that need that a program like this has been done. And probably we should consider how much more we could do. But certainly there's a responsibility of GCOM in terms of its civic and voter education program, and a responsibility of the Ministry of Communities to ensure that their work is done in the broad community out there. And there may be NGOs also that may find it prudent to be engaged. I know in the past there were some young people who came together and had campaigns that were informative and educational, and that this is what is required.
What are you on here, Mr. One? Yeah, I think that the whole idea, the process, because as I see it, which I said, the thing is now evolving, and persons have been, they're now getting acquainted. Morning, you're on here.
Good morning.
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 Vincent and Clayton, I've been listening to you guys. A quick one. I would like to see Vincent taking this discourse a little more higher. Perhaps to organize a
Speak a little louder, Ken Wendy.
Huh?
Speak a little louder, I'm not getting you clear.
Okay. What I'm saying basically is the need for this education exercise to be up a little. I want to suggest that Vincent organize a series, perhaps every...
Lower your TV volume down, I'm getting a little feedback.
Sorry about that.
Excellent, excellent. We there now.
Okay. Vincent, to you specifically, because you can articulate these issues so eloquently, so simple, that everybody could understand. I want to suggest that you take this exercise up a little higher, and perhaps every week or whatever, but for the radio and the TV, just give us a series explaining all the little details and give us a healthy discourse. We're getting a lot of noise and nonsense.
Yes.
Let us get something of intelligence, and so we can learn something. We need to know more about it, especially the young people.
Thank you, that's great, that's true.
Reach them to participate in the process. Thank you guys, and best wishes.
Yeah, thank you for your contribution. I think Mr. Alexander will certainly appreciate those comments, because I consider him, maybe other people too, I consider him an authority on local democracy and local authority systems in this country, and that's precisely the reason why I suggested to him that I have him on this program today, to make sure that he addresses those issues. Morning, you're on here.
Hello, good morning.
Morning.
Hello. It's from West Bank. I call him from the West Bank at Bellevue.
Yes, my dear.
You know, this something I want to inform you all. These
Yeah.
PUC people, they go in and take black people in them area for run to the local government election. So the black people now must go and vote for them, so y'all must get no vote.
Let me hear that again. What did you say?
What I was saying, I'm saying that PUC, they electing Negro people from the area to run for the local government election
That's in West Bank.
on the West Bank, Bellevue and Potential. That is what they're doing.
Okay.
And they get them and tell these people them know what familiar with the people them, so they go on and vote for them. Then now what we have to do is get volunteer for work and sensitize people don't vote for certain people because they're working for PPC.
Well, the decision of the communities, and that's the reason why we're having programs like these, to make sure that
Yes.
persons understand what their responsibilities and their functions are in relation to being a candidate or going up for elections to represent people,
Yeah.
and don't be used as pawn for
Well,
organization.
we realize
private
that
or
we realize
political.
that is doing that is why I am nobody for the legal party, but I did a campaign. And Mr. Ranger time we campaign and when to get satisfaction, we get no satisfaction from nobody. Because if you are come and say neighbor put a assistance to me, $1,000,000 of clothes. And nobody help me. Even though to the village officer would intend. And help me, I have to live with it
All right, I will take your comments. I will make a note of what you've said and perhaps
Yes.
try to see if I can have that matter addressed at some level. Thank you very much for calling.
Thank you.
I think it's important that viewers understand that the Burnham Foundation is a non-governmental organization. It is not a political organization. It's not a political party. And whilst as Guyanese we may have an appreciation that, of what happens in Guyana, there are some areas in which the foundation will not have an involvement because of its nature. Because of its nature.
I think the idea, the point you raised, because I have been getting some complaint in my area too that there are people have been approached by operatives on the PPP party for representation. I don't think they were very successful with a number of people that they have approached, but that has been drawn to my attention. But this is all politics. Persons are trying, organizations are trying to see what influence they can wield. Yes, you're on the air.
Morning, Mr.
Morning, sir.
I'm Mr. Alexander.
Good morning.
Yes.
Miss Edwards speaking to you.
Yes, Ms. Edwards.
Mr. Alexander, to you. I love your information and it is very good for us. And I think if we can have that information more often, it would help our young people a whole lot. Congratulations on all the information you've given to us this morning. It's very edifying. Thank you guys very much. I'll see you beside.
I know you know. You need to you know you need to call me, but you haven't called yet.
No, I know that. I will see you though.
All right. Okay, thanks for calling.
In response to what seems to be an emerging view that there's need for more knowledge out there, what I can say, the Burnham Foundation is committed to public education, and that any local group, any local set of people who want to have an exposure, they can approach us and we will try to find the resource persons to come. Our comment will be to give them information generally on local government, the local government system. Our comment will not be an involvement in supporting one or the other side, or one or the other person in the election process.
Morning, you're on the air.
Yeah, Mr. Hanks.
Morning, my dear.
Yes, you know who I am, Mr. Clayton. No, they call a call, but the PPP are getting the black people to go run for them. But let me tell you, there are many, many Indians who are die-hard PNC, and there are many, many black people who are die-hard PPP. We can't stop that as the preference. We don't want to racialize the thing and say all Indians must be PPP and all black people must be PNC. No, they know what they're doing. Some of them, I know black people, they are PPP, and I know some Indian people who you can't tell them anything but else about, only you can tell them with PNC. So that's a dead die-hard Burnhamite.
Yeah, I know that there are things like that in our community. In fact, on this program before, we have spoken about issues of that nature. We don't really try, because we try to make sure that persons be very objective in relation to whatever decision they make. Persons can feel that as a result of them. I don't have a problem with whoever going to go and try to
I don't have a problem with that.
But that is person's personal decision. If you want to you should be able to weigh the consequences of your action.
Correct.
Yeah.
Correct. No.
All right, thanks for calling.
No, but what we're dealing with now, hello?
Yes, I'm hearing you, yeah.
What we're dealing with now is a local government.
Local government elections.
Just in our area. That's what we're dealing with.
Yeah, we're trying to educate people, give them information as to how the thing works and what they need to do, the importance of them going out there to vote on November 12th.
Right. That's what we need. Thank you very much, Mr.
Yeah, okay, thanks for calling.
I think what's important to note here is that things local need not be political.
Correct.
Because when you're talking things local, you're talking about services, you're talking about your sanitation, about your disposal of garbage, about drainage, and
other social issues.
And these issues cut across political lines. And so what people need to recognize is that at the local level, what you really need is the people who can best serve the purpose of delivering to the community
Service.
service and what the community needs. This is, it's local politics. It's not national divide.
Mm. I like that one. You're not a national divide, because you would find coming up. But I know on the last occasion, our level of support and participation by the country as a whole, in terms of coming out for local government election, had been very low. I would like to hear what you think.
Well, it is not unusual for the turnout at local elections to be less than national elections, and this is not something restricted to Guyana.
Mhm.
This is universal. So that's one. Secondly, in the case of Guyana, I would say the absence of these elections for extended periods and the unawareness of what local government really means would have resulted in a lower
That low
turnout.
turnout.
One would hope that what has occurred over the last 3 years, so to speak, would encourage people to come out from two perspectives. One, they now have knowledge of what local government is about, and therefore the need for them to be involved. And two, they recognize that if they're not involved, they're likely to be saddled with councillors who will not serve their purpose. And the fact of the matter is, whether you like it or not, local authorities will impact your lives. And so you can't just sit idly by and say, well, you know why I'm not getting involved. If you don't get involved, you take what you get.
Because
Local authorities and what they do will impact your lives, and therefore it behoves you as a citizen to embrace your civic responsibility, to participate in the elections and beyond the elections, so that you can get the best out of the system on one hand, and so that you have the moral authority to castigate the system if it doesn't deliver.
yeah, your voice will be
On the
heard. You
other
can
hand,
raise issues
so
that need to be addressed.
Involvement is important.
I missed that one. Anyway, I think the point you're making is very important, because I think on the first instance, I feel too, like you have said, that the reason for the low turnout is as a result of persons not really knowing or understanding what was being done and what role they need to play in exercising their franchise to get out there and vote. And on this time around, I am hopeful, based on whatever level of education takes place between now and the 12th of November, that persons will be so informed and will take action to ensure that they get out there and vote. Because if you don't, you said you take what you get, but you are living in a constitution and you need to make sure that you get out there, vote, so for persons who you know can represent the interests of your community and can advance the services that fall under the umbrella of local democracy. Like you said, drainage, what you call garbage and health issues, and the use of illicit drugs and crime and those matters in your community.
All local issues.
All local issues. Those are issues that need to be addressed at the local level, and it's important that person get out there and vote. I want to perhaps just go a little further back, because this idea of local government, I want to perhaps tell our viewers that the person who really perhaps looked at our system and recognized that it need to be so fashioned that it can take into account the needs and interests of our people at the local level was Lyndon Forbes Samson Burnham. And I want you to just go back and just give me some perspective as to Forbes Burnham's initiative in making sure that local government, in terms of the acts and so on that is passed, and make sure that we have this system that can address the needs of our people.
I would say from a local government perspective, there are probably 4 important moments in our history. The first important moment was the abolition of slavery, and the fact that our foreparents fostered a system of local government through the village movement. Our foreparents are the founders of the local government system. I would say that Burnham took it from there insofar as in 1969, having come into government in 1964, he sought to forward the system with the introduction of the Municipal District Councils Act and with the holding of elections at that time. He also continued his trajectory because in 1980, he was the author of the whole idea of the local democratic organs, which authorship is still the foundation of the system we're working with today, because his ideas were in the Constitution. There'll be no fundamental changes, and so that we have the moment of Borman 69 and Borman 1980, giving clear guidance and direction to what local government should be. We should then look at the fact
I want to
that
take one call. I see a caller trying to get me. Yes, morning, you're on here. Yeah, morning. But you need to speak a little louder, please. Yes.
Morning.
We are talking about local government election, but here what? I have an issue. I'm a member of the PTA of the potential school, and we have some stalls outside of that school building, and we've been trying to get them removed for two reasons. One, the drain that is in front of the school, they throw garbage in that drain. Number two, they do not contribute to the school because the stalls inside would have to give us a little donation. The stalls outside don't do that. You would not believe how far we went and how many times we run to get those stalls to be removed from there. Since the previous administration, we've tried and they're still there.
Which school is that?
In your forum, I don't know how you can help us to remove those stalls from there. I've been to all the...
Which school is that?
We have been to all the places, potential secondary schools.
Potential,
We've been to all the places that we were required to go to, follow all the protocols. And we are back at square one. A new term is coming, and yet the stalls are there. It looks very, very good. We've been trying to get some order in the school compound where all the stalls can be there, like sort of order. We've not gotten nowhere. I don't know.
That is a local authority.
All right, let me say quickly, I'm an advocate of what
we're talking about local. Do you know we went to the local authority?
Yes, I agree with you.
And and nothing, nowhere.
Okay.
We went to the RDC, all the DC, and we still back to square one.
I know that.
I'm an advocate of the order you're talking about. I think
no, this is from before, and it's come over to the same thing, back to the same. It's very, very disgusting.
All right. We get the point you're making.
Where do we go now? This is another avenue that I try here now.
Yes, I'm glad you did. I'm really glad you did.
This matter has to be
resolved. It does not work here. Well, I don't know what else to do. I don't know what else the school should do. What else the committee should do.
All right, good. We have a time problem, so we have to kind of wrap up. But I want to say that this is a matter that should be tackled conjointly between the local authority and the Ministry of Education.
It was not tackled. They're all aware of it. Nobody in this region could say they're not aware
of it. I can give you an undertaking that we will make approaches to the ministry on this matter, because it's a matter which I myself am engaged in another place, but another education institution. And there's a model I have that I want the Ministry of Education to adopt on this question. Just bear in mind one thing, that the people who have those stalls, it's livelihood. And so we just can't simply throw them out. We have to give them an alternative.
We have given them deadlines, they have deadlines. Remember, they have an option, they can come in the school compound.
Good. So we have to pursue that alternative, and in conjunction with the ministry and the local authority, we have to go and have that situation.
I'm assuming you're going over all the process that we did already. You're going to go over that, because remember, we would have already gone through all of that.
I know you're
That is the way it has to be done, and we have to pursue it hard.
Those who have been marking time on the issue are going to stop marking time. They will have to act to make sure that your concerns and the problem you're experiencing will be addressed.
They listen to the PTA and no action. I'm assuming that talking to you here, I know this is a public forum, the school will see some action, and we need some order. All the stalls must be inside, and they have to contribute to the school, because the school is dying in need of some funds.
Okay. We will...
I have to wrap up now.
Hopefully the officials have heard, but I can tell you that we will also, out of a matter of principle, be approaching the authorities, not in relation to your school, in relation to the schools at large. This is a national problem. It's a national problem. And time doesn't allow us to articulate why we think so, but we will certainly be activists in this regard.
All right, I want to take this opportunity, having concluded that exchange, that we will be back with you again on the fourth Sunday in the month of September when we bring to you another program. Maybe we may have another program
I would suggest
on
that,
local government.
given what has been said this morning, that we commit to continue the series on local government in September and in October.
Okay, that's great. Well, I will certainly, you heard it, Mr. Alexander is not only a local government authority, he's also the chairman of the foundation, and the foundation of which I'm a part. And we have this program monthly, but we will try to focus for the next 2 programs or maybe more on local government, since it's in the air and it is scheduled to be held on the 12th of November. I want to say thank you to all our viewers, those persons who have been with us during the hour. We want to thank you for allowing us in your homes, and I want to thank you, Mr. Alexander, for being here today to discuss this very important topic of local government in Guyana. I'm your host, Clayton Hines, saying thank you until the next time.
We find that there are many signs, sometimes written in the sand. What will happen